Good day, my name is Philip Fleury, and the presented technical application brief is the exercise of geospatial tools and emergency management planning to reduce consequences affecting vulnerable populations. In the comprehensive emergency management model of proactive mitigation, emergency managers require geospatial tools that can be in the form of paper maps, GPS, internet sites, and visualization interfaces to support decision-making in emergency management. The technological aspects of these mediums are Spatial Decision Support Systems, or SDSS, Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, and various forms of clearinghouses that archive information related to space. Geospatial tools such as GIS can integrate information from different sources and format them into a single source, whereas SDSS allows for analytical modeling to assist the emergency manager in their decision-making capacities. All disasters have a temporal and geographic nature that identifies the duration of impact. In many articles, geospatial refers to interdependent resources such as maps, datasets, tools, and procedures. Location gives geospatial data their value and its attributes, such as the location of vulnerable populations and the resources that may be available to them within the affected area. Vulnerable populations can thus be mapped in relation to their occurring future hazard event to mitigate a potential disaster. Comprehensive Emergency Management, or CEM, teaches that disasters, man-made or natural, overwhelm local authority capabilities and relief efforts. Disasters, by definition, are constantly evolving, unexpected, increasing severity, and are cyclical hazards. They have the potential to cause communities significant physical and economic damage. Currently, populations are increasing in locations susceptible to hazards, such as flood zone sites, wildfire-prone zones, and politically high-value target areas. Emergency management is a dynamically diverse field, but from a national government perspective, FEMA is relatively young as a result of the 1920s civil defense philosophy of emergency response. Our current model of comprehensive emergency management arose as a result of the Cold War in the early 90s. This introduced proactive concepts of crisis management, emergency preparedness, contingency planning, emergency services, and civil protection. Due to this evolution in public policy, many academics and practitioners argue that FEMA is better served to promote funding for proactive research and to deliver aid to states when required. This perspective highlights that all disasters are thus mitigated on the local level of government with upward level resources and funding as additional support tools. Research that has been selected to be funded includes geospatial tools and various interoperability systems that promote communication between relief agencies, exhibiting the government's emergency support function and prearranged mutual aid agreements. According to the National Resource Council's 2007 article, geospatial data and tools should be an essential part of every stage in emergency management, from planning through response and recovery to the mitigation of future events. Erden and Zeke's Disaster Management Life Cycle contribution states that maps are relevant because they document the spatial relationships and the changing elements of the disasters to control and mitigate its effects. The practice of mapping potential hazards and their relations to human existence is low-tech and has long been documented since the 1800s. Vulnerability science, which is relatively new, plays an integral part in the comprehensive emergency management restoration cycle and which evolved from the 1920s civil defense perspective of reactive government services. The modern types of geospatial tools available that have multiple functions than just mapping affected areas include remote sensing, computer-assisted design systems, and geolibraries. Geographic information systems are among the most accessible technologies by various emergency management agencies and public health departments. Spatial decision support systems are, however, more limited amongst institutions due to their costs, even though their ability to map possible outcomes for decision makers to enact action is clearly highly valuable in assisting vulnerable populations. The National Resource Council states that all disasters have a geographic footprint that identifies the duration of impact in the disaster zones. Emergency managers can determine, based on this data, areas most affected and the location of vulnerable populations in relation to the hazard event. This is useful information in the time period directly following the disaster, where geospatial tools can be used to map grid areas in need of timely response by emergency service agencies and relief groups. Challenges of geospatial tool applications include lack of proactive preparedness measures, non-intergovernmental coordination, lack of stakeholder communication, and lack of relative community education for potential disasters. These flaws that originate in the local level, moving upwards through the systems of government, can have dire consequences for vulnerable populations. Some of these consequences were evident in Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and Hurricane Sandy in 2012, which New York City is still recuperating from. This technology application brief, which identifies all applications of geospatial tools for New York City's vulnerable populations, which consist of the elderly, homeless, physically and mentally disabled. According to a paper by DeVal and Turnoff in 2006, effective geospatial tools provide timely access to comprehensive, relevant, and reliable information that are critical to mitigation. Top emergency management research, such as Rodriguez, Quarantelli, Maletti, Drimes, and Phillips, argue that Hurricane Katrina demonstrated significant government relief failures, coupled with a lack of cultural incompetence by authorities that highlighted race and socioeconomic inequalities during relief efforts. In a city like New Orleans, where the poverty rate is higher than 30%, vulnerability science shows that persistent institutionalized exclusionary practices exasperated the hurricane into more than a natural disaster, thus constituting a breach in social infrastructure. In contrast to New Orleans, New York City performed fairly better in relation to Hurricane Sandy. However, there was still room for improvement where technology could have been increasingly applied to assist in the emergency response and recovery efforts. Geospatial tools are available to the general public for education on possible hazards, emergency resource linkages, and evacuation sites for affected communities. These tools and various information systems, properly and consistently implemented, could have assisted in the mitigation and preparation for the hurricane so that vulnerable populations were pre-identified and plans implemented to evacuate or provide needed resource prior to Sandy's touchdown. In comprehensive emergency management, geospatial tools are unique analytical devices used to visualize catastrophic concepts for policymakers, emergency managers, and the public. It significantly magnifies the realms of disaster research towards practical applications prior, during, and after hazard events in order to forecast possible outcomes based on database management systems. Geospatial tools have a broader application than just cartographic display, including longitudinal directions. Utilizing spatial and non-spatial data as an analytic function to include vulnerable population demographics and climate monitoring for agencies and stakeholders to make decisions based on real-time data via vulnerability mapping. As highlighted by various academics and practitioners, This technology application brief will demonstrate that geospatial tools aren't just mapping mediums compiling inventories of hazard events, but instead can be used as a communication platform for various systems, coordinating logistics of resources and equipment in an effort to reduce losses and plan effectively for the future, especially for assistance to vulnerable populations. Geospatial tools are most effective to support of the emergency manager's needs, not how advanced the technology is. It works in collaboration with database management systems, a user interface, and the emergency manager's expertise. In conclusion, 9/11 and other disasters have highlighted the silo effect of stakeholder information sharing. Geospatial tools such as the Spatial Decision Support Systems, or SDSS, have the ability to serve as a communication mechanism for stakeholders on the national, regional, and local levels of government to coordinate assistance via agency interoperability and data sharing agreements. Future exercise of these information systems as a decision tool for practitioners should solve the legal dilemmas of information privacy sharing and interoperability with external systems for enhanced scenario modeling that apply geographic information systems for increased vulnerability assessment of the affected disaster zone and the location of vulnerable populations. Realizing the limitations of institutional factors, such as the limited resources in acquiring geospatial tools for every emergency management jurisdiction, restrictive agreements fearing breaches in data security, liability concerns, lack of training, and interoperability. All are issues to be addressed with future collaboration amongst emergency managers prior to the next disaster. The technology brainstorming decisions should be implemented during regional pre-disaster exercises and their results examined for effectiveness, efficiency, and implementation. Corintelli and various authors state that continued research is needed for future technology questions of geospatial tools and spatial decision support systems operating as standalone units or being able to talk to other systems. These concepts will link environmental development and disaster mitigation planning to identify vulnerabilities, thus reducing service duplication, all in an effort to effectively transition into a sustainable community after disaster strike. Once again, my name is Philip Fleury, and I would like to thank you for listening to my technology application brief and the exercise of geospatial tools and emergency management planning to reduce consequences affecting vulnerable populations. Thank you and have a good day.